Okay, good morning. It's January 30th, and the scripture verses that we cover today are Matthew 20, verses 1 through 28. The big old chunk of verses today, 28 verses. But it's broken up well. So, small recap because we're not actually leaving the topic of yesterday. The parable that we open up with today is still Jesus's response to yesterday. So if you were here with us yesterday, then it was pretty rad, right? Learning about the young rich ruler and all that he had and all that we learned about him. But the very end of yesterday is when Peter and the disciples were looking at what Jesus had just done with this rich young ruler and the interaction that they had just had, which was Jesus really putting his attention on the idolatry in the young man's heart, and how Jesus personally called that individual to leave everything behind and come and store treasure in heaven and come and be a disciple. And so Peter and the other disciples were present for that and listening to that. And so Peter's, thinking about this, and he had asked Jesus a question at the end of yesterday. And that question was, it was a statement and a question. He said to Jesus, "We've given up everything to follow you. What will we get?" So that was the very ending ish of yesterday, was that question. And then that prompted Jesus's response with the beautiful promise that we all cling to. Like everybody clings to Matthew 19:29. If you're new, and you've left things behind just to come to residential discipleship, you need to read Matthew 19:29, because it is the sweetest promise of, okay, God, I've left things behind to come follow after you. And the list that's in there was a list of relationships: mother, brother, father, children, lands, wives. Okay. And so Peter says that to Jesus. He's like, hey, like, we've given up everything to come and follow you. What will we get? Kind of like, what's in it for me? He's kind of got this, like, we did that. What's in it for me? And that's when Jesus responded with that statement of, hey, whoever has done that for my name's sake is going to inherit in this world and eternal life. And so, and then he really ended with the statement of whoever's going to be greatest now will be least then, because the rich young ruler was really out to make his life great. So when we open today, Jesus is still responding to Peter's question. And I think we forget that sometimes when there's a break in the day and we go about our day, and then we, have our evening Bible studies, and we come back the next morning and we open with a parable. But, Jesus now telling them a parable, and he's still on the topic of the greatest versus the least, and if you're gonna put yourself last. And in God's kingdom, it's really like upside down from the world's way of doing things, and the world is just out to climb a corporate ladder, be the best, have the best stuff. And in God's kingdom, it's becoming a servant and putting yourself lower, and that those are going to be the greatest. So he's on the same topic. So he begins, we begin, and he continues to say what the kingdom of heaven is like. And he's communicating to his disciples what the kingdom of heaven is like. Again, in response to Peter's question. Now, if I could just give a little, statement of what this parable overall is like, it is about really that Jesus doesn't reward the way we think, the way we reward. Okay, Jesus doesn't reward the same way. And when Jesus gives promises, because he will, you guys will hear about this in so many teachings that about God's promises. You'll learn about the men of the Old Testament, Abraham, and the promises God made him, and see how long, Abraham had to wait. But one of the promise to Abraham specifically was that he would have many sons, that there would be lots of children. And Abraham did, but he had one son of promise, actually. And then, he had Ishmael, but then he had a whole bunch of other kids with some other people. But the son of promise was one child. And the nation came out of that descendant. But even that promise, it's just like interesting to think of like how promises actually come through to fruition and what God actually meant when he gave them. And so we can, receive a promise and sort of explain it in our minds of how and what it's going to look like. And it's important to just let the Lord be the one to unfold it all. So God's way of distributing and God's way of rewarding is really what this parable is about. Let's read it and we'll dig into it. So he says in verse 1 of Matthew 20, "For the kingdom of heaven is like the landowner who went out early one morning to hire workers for his vineyard. He agreed to pay the normal daily wage and he sent them out to work. At 9 o'clock in the morning, he was passing through the marketplace and saw some people standing around doing nothing. So he hired them, telling them he would pay them whatever was right at the end of the day." Verse 5 says, "So they went to work in the vineyard at noon, and again at 3 o'clock, he did the same thing. At 5 o'clock that afternoon, he was in town again and saw some more people standing around. He asked them, 'Why haven't you been working all day?' They replied, 'Because no one hired us.' The landowner told them, 'Then go out and join the others in my vineyard.'" Verse 8, "That evening, he told the foreman to call the workers in and pay them, beginning with the last workers first. When those hired at 5 o'clock were paid, each received a full day's wage. When those hired first came to get their pay, they assumed they would receive more, but they too were paid a day's wage. When they received their pay, they protested the owner. They protested to the owner. Those people, they say in verse 12, those people worked only 1 hour, and yet you've paid them just as much as you paid us who worked all day in the scorching heat. He answered one of them, 'Friend, I haven't been unfair. Didn't you agree to work all day for the usual wage? Take your money and go. I wanted to pay this last worker the same as you. Is it against my law for me? Is it against the law for me to do what I want with my money? Should you be jealous because I am kind to others? So those who are last now will be first then, and those who are first will be last." You have to have a little bit of compassion upon on the guys, because while it is true, they worked from earliest hour, which was most likely 6 a.m. at the start. And then like every few hours, the owner would go out and find more people. But if you look at like the words, I think are important. You guys know me, I get stuck on words. But he went out to hire workers. He went out in the morning, and it was the workers who were ready and willing and like, I'm here and I'm looking for work. Okay. But then every other person he finds was not referred to as a worker. It was just he found people. He found people standing around. He even in the New King James Version, he says people that were just idle, right? People that were not really being wise with their time. You guys know that anything idle is not usually a good place, like idle hands or an idle mind. There's a quote, a statement that says idle hands or an idle mind is the devil's playground. But this vineyard owner, he had an inexhaustible amount of work that had to be done. Like he had so much opportunity. There's a ton of opportunity. And there were some people who were up and ready to work. And so he hires them at first. And it was a good agreement that they had. In verse 2, there's an agreement that's made, and it was the normal daily wage. So there's nothing unfair. In fact, the owner of the vineyard is very fair. He is fair and faithful to do his end of the deal. But we can really think that we deserve better or we deserve more because we're a harder worker. And if this is an attitude that you have, like let this attitude really be like revealed to you if you ever think that you've got this, if you have the deserving attitude, like I deserve a break, or I deserve, to have some freedoms or this or that, because we really deserve nothing, right? Like we don't deserve anything. And if we got what we deserved, it wouldn't be good because we're sinners. And so they have this deserving attitude because they worked longer and they worked harder. And while it is true, they worked in the heat of the day, but what are their eyes on? What are
the prize, the money?
Not, okay, yeah, money. And then what else? Themselves. Their eyes are on themselves, and more specifically about themselves, what they did, what they earned. Like their eyes are on, it's like a very simple, again, I just gotta keep drawing your attention. Like we want to stay tethered to the scriptures. This is still his statement from yesterday, coming off of the rich young ruler who really was earning and was trying to, earn salvation. So these workers, they thought that they deserved more, and their eyes are all over the other people who didn't work as hard, and then themselves. And so they're comparing themselves with the other workers. And this doesn't leave a lot of room for God's will in the matter or his heart in the matter. And so when the owner of the vineyard, which is a picture of the Lord, by the way, okay, God's telling this parable, but oh Lord, I pray my voice, my throat. God's giving this parable, but it's a reflection of him. And so the people standing around, they still answered the call and they joined the work. And so it was later in the day, and there's like different groups of people. But God, the owner says, I'm going to pay you. There's not even an agreement made with everybody else. There's only an agreement made with the first crew, the 6 a.m. crew. And then the other crew, he just says, I will pay you whatever is right. And he's a good God, and he's a just God, and he's a fair God, and God picks. So at the end of the day, you guys know what happens as we've already read it. But I love that the owner said, let the ones that only worked an hour, do the last first. And so what this allowed for was, it did allow for comparison. And in the New Testament, Paul writes, and he's writing to a church, and he's correcting this church, and he's saying, and it's about comparison. It's like a little verse that says, those that compare themselves and measure themselves by themselves are not wise. And when it comes to unity among the workers, we're all God's servants. We're called. Some of us are called to do more and work longer. Like if you're going to compare yourself to others, then you're going to find a reason to be bitter. You're going to find a reason. You're going to look and be like, it's not fair. You're going to have a bad attitude. You have to realize there was nothing unfair about this. The owner of the vineyard followed through and rewarded based on the original contract, based on the agreement. And so he was faithful and fair, but he is also very kind. And it is his to do what he wants. If you guys look at those last few verses from today, from what we read of the parable, he says, take your money and go. I wanted to pay this last worker the same. It's what he wanted to do. And is he not able to do what he wants with his own money? He absolutely is. Like, you can do what you want with what belongs to you. And it was his kindness. The pay was based upon the landowner's generosity. And so there's a warning in here. He says, should you be jealous because I'm kind to others? And this is just the human nature. And, take offense if you need to, because getting offended is actually good sometimes, but it's very immature to have your eyes all over somebody else, especially when God is just being good and kind. This is stuff my kids do. When somebody gets blessed with something in my house, happens almost every single day, then the fingers start to point, the what about me's start to happen. And at the end of the day, it's like, this is what I chose to do. I chose to bless this child. The answer for your children or for you guys, if because this is what happens, I know this kind of stuff happens in residential discipleship. Why can't we be happy for one another? Why can't you actually be happy that somebody else gets blessed? And are you so selfish and wrapped up in yourself that even their blessing becomes all about you and all about why didn't I? Why can't I? Or I thought that I would, the expectation that you would be treated better based off better behavior or longer work hours. And so there's a pride sort of wrapped up in this too. But God rewards how he wants to reward. And so coming right off of that promise too of, yes, whoever's left all of these things is going to inherit. We have all, like, I look at this wall of our graduates and the ones that I still need to get up there. And I just think like everybody has made a call to leave behind for a moment of their time to come into residential discipleship. And then that call doesn't change. We continue to pick up our cross every day and follow him. But none of these lives are the same. None of them. Some of them have some crazy hardship in them, but they all have their blessing from God. Like everybody has their blessing from God. And it's not a passed out, like, you guys heard me say that statement yesterday when I was talking about God blessing the children, or no, somewhere in yesterday's teaching, I know I said, when it comes to our kids and, why can't I have it and not being fair? And we tell our kids, like, we're not raising socialists. Like, that's not God. Life isn't fair. And you want to, as a parent, you want to prepare your kids for the world. And life is not fair. You don't want to pamper them and make their home life so like everything's fair and even, because that doesn't prepare them for life, and it's so like when I, getting back to just what we see, everybody's life is different, but the call is the same and God is the rewarder. And be warned not to have an evil eye. So he does warn of this. He says, should you be jealous because I'm kind to others, or is your eye evil? Is the other way that it's recorded in the scriptures is your eye evil? So what does that mean? What does an evil eye mean? What are your thoughts on it?
Looking with bitterness.
Mm-hmm.
You're trying to find a problem.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, both of you guys. One of my ladies, I don't know if you guys can hear them online or not, but one of my ladies said, looking with bitterness, and the other one said, looking with trying to find a problem. So when your eye is evil, it means your perspective is off and it's filtered. The way you view things is filtered through an angry heart or a bitter heart. And so if all you see in someone is bad, evil, not fair, or if all you see in somebody is ew, selfish, whatever, then your eye is evil towards that person. And hey, you might actually see some legit things, you know what I mean? But you'll know when you have an evil eye, you don't see anything good. And you know what an evil eye does is it even changes your perspective on the Lord. And that's the danger in it, is that you can then even start to think that God isn't good. And so I love that God's like, I'm being kind to others. Is your eye evil? Are you jealous because I'm kind? We want to be, I love it when people are genuinely happy for other people getting blessed. And this is something we have to teach in my household all the time. Of course, my kids are young, so that's going to happen. But both my households, Blessed Hope and at home, we're in a season of really trying to teach this, where it's like, be happy when somebody else is blessed, learning selflessness, learning it's not all about me. And there will be payoff as you mature and as you grow, you change, but perspectives can change on God, and that's a dangerous place to be in. So let's go on. He says, so now the last will be first and the first will be last. And then we do actually begin like a different sort of section, because Now it says, as Jesus was going up to Jerusalem, he took the 12 disciples aside privately. Sorry, my eyes went blurry. As Jesus was going up to Jerusalem, he took the 12 disciples aside privately and told them what was going to happen to him. Listen, he said, we're going up to Jerusalem where the Son of Man will be betrayed to the leading priests and the teachers of religious law. They will sentence him to die. Then they will hand him over to the Romans to be mocked, flogged with a whip, and crucified. But on the third day, he will be raised from the dead. Okay, we have to step in. We have to. Like, do you guys ever watch The Magic School Bus? My little sister did. Okay, some of you guys did. So I think, or like Superbuck. I've never actually watched an episode, but I remember her watching it. But like they would go on a field trip or something and they would actually enter into like the thing, right? Like they would enter into a dragon's stomach or something. I don't know. Or like Superbook. That's one I'm more familiar with because my own children watch that. And that, moms out there, Superbook is amazing for your kids. It's the Bible is the Superbook. And it's children who are just in their everyday life and maybe they stole a cookie or maybe they lied to their parents or maybe they weren't faithful to do their chores. And then after the act, the sin, the act happens, Superbook flies out of their backpack and opens up and sucks them in. And so now they're all of a sudden in the scriptures, taken back to either the Garden of Eden or somewhere in the scriptures, and they're learning a lesson based off what just happened to them in life. So it's just like really cool. So, but we need to do that. Like we need to be like the Superbook cartoon where we step into the scriptures. And please, Jesus is going where? Where is he going? He's headed to the cross. Thank you. He's headed there. It's how long has it been since they've been walking with Jesus? About 3 years. Yeah. So they've been with him. I know it's only January 30th. We just started this journey in the Gospels 30 days ago. There's been so much. There's been 3 years of them walking with the Lord. If somebody could just silently say a prayer for me, I don't feel good. And so he's headed to Jerusalem and he's about to go be crucified. Okay. And so the cross is going to happen and he pulls them aside. So just you're on the road with Jesus, you guys. You're walking, you've been with this man. This isn't the first time that he's talked about this, but they always missed it. Like this is something heavy. Sometimes I think we can just get so used to, oh, Jesus is talking about the cross again. But it's about to be accomplished and he just pulls them aside. Did you guys ever like get pulled aside to be told something important? Did you ever visit somebody when they were sort of on their last leg of life and there needs to be like important conversations, like you just have moments with people and sometimes, or it's like with my kids, I really want them to hear something. And instead of just saying it and they're busy in their life, I'll actually pull them in and say, hey, look at me. And then I'll say what I need to say to them so that they hear. This is a moment where Jesus, they're walking, they're going to Jerusalem, and he takes the 12 aside. And there's probably other people with them, but he pulls his 12 aside, pulls them aside. And what he tells them was what he was about to go face. He is about to go face not just the cross alone, although that was like the magnitude of the suffering, but he says we're going and betrayal. Betrayal was what the first thing that he was going to go through. Okay, it was betrayal. Then which hurts, by the way. Betrayal is a deep wound. And we know that it was going to happen by one of his 12, okay, Judas. And so that's a deep wound. That hurts. And then be led to the leading priests and the teachers of law, where he would then be sentenced. Okay, he would be given a sentence of death. And if that wasn't enough, there would be mockings. he would be mocked by the Romans. So made fun of and mocked, and then flogged with a whip, which is the cat of nine tails, is what they would call it. It had a bunch of leather straps on it with shards of iron or glass, and he would be whipped with it. And so it would tear your skin. You just write that question down and I'll ask you right after. And so he would be flogged, and that would just rip your skin up, and then crucified, nailed to a tree. And so you just think, like, if anybody that mattered to me was going to pull me aside to tell me something, what would you think I would be like? I would be like invested in the conversation, right? Like if anybody, honestly, if my husband, if Peggy, or if Jeanette, if anybody of importance to me wanted to tell me something important, I would be like all eyes and ears, like hanging on every word. Or at least I hope I would be. And so Jesus just tells them this, and he does say, but on the third day, he'll be raised from the dead. Now, just again, little side note, Jesus always spoke of the resurrection every single time he spoke of his death. He never left out the resurrection, which is super important. Like we should always be focused on sort of what happens after the cross, because we are called to daily pick up our cross. And so it is good to be focused on the fruit that's going to come from it. But sometimes we can be so focused on what we know the good is happening, that we can sort of miss, like it's sometimes agonizing over what you have to go through is worse than actually going through it. When you know something difficult is coming in your future, then sometimes that's like one of the hardest parts. And once it starts and you go through it. It's kind of like childbirth. Like not the first time because you really don't know, but like the second time, you know what's coming. And it's hard to, you like sort of agonize just knowing the pain you're going to be in. But once it starts, you're just in it and you're doing it. So this was a moment, like, I just think if Jesus ever needed anything, or this was just such an opportunity. And what do we see happen? Do we have any response? Oh, let me tell you that from Luke's version of this, Luke actually does tell us, Luke adds that they understood none of these things. Okay, Luke adds that one statement of they didn't understand. It went over their heads. Like it just totally went over their heads. They didn't get it. So just put yourself there, because I'm thinking, like, if Jesus were saying these things, I would be all ears and all eyes and ears. And what happens? What do we see happen? Do we see any response to the disciples to what he says? It seems like they didn't hear him or listen, but really they didn't understand. And there is an implication from the absence of response that this did go way over their heads, plus the fact that Luke adds that. But what we see is verse 20. The mother of James and John, the sons of Zebedee, came to Jesus with her sons, and she knelt respectfully to ask a favor. What is your request? But before we get into that, I just really was stuck on the lack of response from the disciples. And just what a shame to not respond to such a thing. Like when Jesus is trying to communicate something and to just have no response. We can always ask for understanding if we don't understand something. But here, the mother of James and John. Now, I don't blame the mother. I'm sure these guys were stoked. Can we remember? I don't know how many days went by between what we read yesterday and what we're reading right now in verse 20. But what I do know is this: those men got told that they were going to rule and reign with Jesus. That was part of the promise, specifically for the 12, that they were going to rule and reign with Jesus, that they were going to sit on 12 thrones. That's what they got told yesterday. So I'm like all about the promises, right? Like that's such a rad, cool promise. And I would just hold on to that. Now, you also have to remember that the Jewish nation, the Israelites, they were always waiting for their Messiah to come and rule and reign. That's what they had been waiting. That's what they were growing up was just drilled into them, was that that's what they are waiting for. And so even though Jesus is communicating something different to them all along the way about his betrayal and suffering, that would go over their heads. But when Jesus would make a promise, like in the kingdom age, in the new world, they probably were not thinking eternity, new world. They were thinking when there's liberation from the Romans. And so they get this promise, and however recent, if it was just the same day, again, I'm sorry, I wish I had looked into it more for you guys this morning, but um, but they've been told that they're going to rule and reign. And so I'm not surprised then that we have a mom. And moms, they always want the best for their children, right? Their moms always do. And there's been so many little things for moms lately. As a mom, it is so important that, I mean, the only great thing you should want for your children really is a simple life in Christ. Like that should be the most pleasing thing to you, is that your child would just simply have a relationship with Jesus. That it doesn't have to look like some big, huge ministry, that they don't have to become pastors or pastors' wives. I mean, that is great, but there's no holy calling except the calling given to you by God. They're all holy. Like there's not one better than the other. And your calling is holy because God makes it holy, not because it's a certain work. And so, again, like I love her. I love that she wants great things for her kids, but she doesn't know what she's actually asking. And Jesus says that to her. It's like, you don't even know what you're asking. Um, so again, she comes, and it's sweet because she does kneel respectfully to ask a favor, and she's simply asking for favor. That's just what she's asking for, is favor from the Lord. And he says, "What do you wish?" is what he says. And that's really sweet. He invites it. He's just saying, "What is it that you want? What do you wish?" And so she says, "In your kingdom, please let my two sons sit in places of honor next to you, one on your right and the other on your left." And so, she's just seeking status for her boys. And I mean, isn't it not enough that they would be ruling with Jesus? Again, it's okay to be excited about promises God's made. Um, just thinking of them being told that they're going to rule and reign, but they were just stuck on the here and now. And they missed so much of what God was actually trying to do. And so I know that in one breath, we're always like, you got to think of the crown after the cross. We're always like, in order, what's going to help you get through the difficult moments is thinking of the after. And while that's so true, you can't miss, though, what God's actually doing through the difficult thing that you have to get through. And so, they missed it. And she's like, the kingdom, and I want my boys to sit on the left and the right. The left and the right of Christ's kingdom was the left and the right of him up on the cross, and who actually knows who's going to sit on his left and right? He answers her and he tells her, "You don't know what you're asking," because he was about to go be hung. And there would be two people. There would be somebody on his left and somebody on his right. And it wasn't pretty. And he then says to James and John, "Are you able to drink from the bitter cup of suffering that I'm about to drink?" And they say, "We are." Now, James is the first one of them killed. Okay, early in the book of Acts. So, after Christ's death and resurrection, and not too long after, he's killed by Herod with a sword. And James didn't live a long life serving Christ. And John is actually the last of the ones to die and the only one to not be martyred. And so God had a plan for each of these men. And he asks them, are you able to drink the bitter cup of suffering? And it's just so like us to want the glory, like without the guts, you know? It's just so like us to want the blessing without the difficulty. And if this mom truly knew what it was supposed to look like in Christ's kingdom, she might have, been not asking for that. But really, moms, you don't want to create suffering for your children. You should not be the creator of suffering for your kids. And because of the sin, a lot of times you have been, and God is redemptive. He will redeem and renew and restore and heal. So you don't have to be the creator of suffering, but you don't want to keep them from it. You do want your kids to go through difficult times. You can't pamper them. That does not prepare them for life. They will not be prepared to handle things. So they say, oh, yes, we are able. So they think, we're able to drink from the bitter cup of suffering that I'm about to drink. Like Jesus was about to go through all the things that he listed earlier. So what's happening now? The other disciples are still around. And they all sort of missed what Jesus was saying. And then, Mrs. Mom here comes up and says, can my two boys sit on your right and your left? She's like, yeah, I want my boys. She's like, maybe they went and told her, Mom, we're going to rule and reign like Jesus told us today. Did they give reports like around the dinner table? What was the best thing that happened to you today? And the boys are like, well, Jesus said I'm going to rule and reign in his kingdom with him, whatever. They had obviously shared with their mom what Jesus had said, which is super cool. And then she's all like, oh my gosh, that's amazing. And then she wants even more for them. She's like, I want you guys on the right and the left. So this whole thing's happening, and God's, he's talking and answering, and he still allows her to come and bring the request. But the others are there, and they're watching this go down. And what is their response? Oh, I guess, wait, let me look at verse 23. Just real quick. He just says he doesn't know who's going to sit on his right and his left, by the way. His Father in heaven has prepared places for those. So there is a right and left, and we don't know. Is it Paul from the New Testament and Abraham from the Old Testament? Is it Elijah and somebody else? Is it, Peter and Paul? Who knows? Okay, we'll find out one day. So what do the 10 other disciples, what's their reaction? In verse 24. Indignant. What does that mean?
It's like,
It means like, duh. Yeah.
No.
What else? They're mad. Yeah. They're indignant. They're angry. They're mad. Why? Why are they mad?
Because they want to be the ones.
Yes, because they didn't think of it. Because they're like, dang, like I should have asked for that. So they're mad. Excuse me. They're mad, and they hear what's happening, and they're angry. And so you can just see the fighting. Now, this would often happen among the disciples of Christ disciples that walked with him. They didn't really get a break from each other, you guys. They were together every day for like 3.5 years, and you guys know, you guys can identify with that. You're on the same work projects together, and you have the same rooms. Maybe, I don't know what everybody's situation is, but here at Blessed Hope, there's only 2 rooms. And so, this is just what it is. And God calls them. God called these 12 men together. And you guys remember back when we went over who they were, that there was even the zealots and the tax collector. Like there were men who really their lives and their interests, they really conflicted each other. And there was lots of conflict. And so this isn't anything new for Jesus and the disciples, but it does eventually change. But here, right up until even before he's going to go down the cross. Now, come on, it's like Jesus is trying to tell them what he's about to go through, and they're just focused on themselves. And that is the sad part, is that's where the enemy sort of gets these little victories, these little ha-has, is if he can just work on getting people bitter at each other, if he can just work on getting people's eyes off of Jesus and off of what the Lord's trying to say, or then he can get everybody fighting against themselves. Division is one of the enemy's arrows. It's one of his things that he uses. It's one of his goals, is to get hurt feelings, divisiveness. He'll play on people's pride. That's what he does here. These men, they're mad. They didn't, and the root behind their anger is selfishness, that they didn't think of it first, or that somebody else is going to get something better than them. And so then you have Jesus again, and he calls them together. Okay? And he just says, come on. And so, like a father, he calls them together, and he's always just bringing them together. Every time you just see Jesus, bring them together. Just bring them in. Just bring them together. And he then says, you know that the rulers in this world lord it over their people, and officials flaunt their authority over those under them. But among you, it shall be different. So he talks to them about the examples that they had been given. He's like, you guys, listen. In the world, you know the rulers. Their lives had been spent under Roman rule and Pharisaical leadership. This is what their lives had been under. And they didn't have the greatest examples. Okay, they just didn't. And what their view of authority was oppressive, hypocritical. Okay. And so and that's like similar to us. We can really just think, just like us, you guys didn't always have the best examples. And maybe some of you guys had A+ parents. I really can't complain about my parents, but there's still some things I can say that were hurtful because they're just simply imperfect people. And so Adam and I didn't know how to be married. My parents were divorced, and what we saw, and so were his. And so, we were like, how do we do this? We weren't really given great examples. But that doesn't mean that, like, Christ has a different standard. He said, it shall not be so among you. Okay? He says, among you, it's going to be different. And he says, this is what you've seen. But what he's saying here is that you are not a product of what you've seen. You're not a product of your upbringing. You're not products of what the world tries to make you. He says, this is what you've seen, but among you it shall be different. This is what you've experienced, but among you it shall be different. So you can just think of your own life. And maybe there was just fighting and bickering, or, you've lived a life just doing what you want. And the Lord's like, hey, among us, it's going to be different. If you want to be a leader, you need to learn how to serve. So they were just pining for the top. They just wanted to be the best. They wanted to be, they wanted the higher position. And he's saying, if you want to be a leader, learn how to be a servant. Don't be all about yourself. And whoever wants to be first, get last in line. Okay, put yourself last. And he says, for the Son of Man came not to be served, but to serve others and to give his life a ransom for many. And what Jesus was about to go accomplish on the cross would really be the mission that these men sought to follow after the rest of their lives, until even some of them were put on the cross or killed a different way, martyred for Christ. But I want to read some verses about just division, because in James chapter 4, let's read that one. James 4:1.
Where do wars and fights come from among you? Do they not come from your desires for pleasure that war in your members?
Thank you. The chapter before that, and then that chapter, is really, well, as you guys heard what she said, where do they come? Where do wars and fightings come from? It comes from within you. It comes from selfish, pleasures. It comes from self. Self is like the core root behind like division and fighting. And what's crazy is that within the Christian community, within our Christian just world, our life with each other, some of the fights and the wars can be some of the most bitter and severe, and it's really sad. And it is because God is doing such a deep work in our hearts where he's really helping self to come out and die. But we can really battle some bitter and severe things. And the source is always the same. It's just carnality. It's desire for selfishness. Psalm 133:1 says,
How wonderful and pleasant it is when brothers live in harmony.
thank you. It is wonderful and pleasant. I mean, it's amazing. When there's peace, it's great. But we got to fight for it. You have to know, you have to prepare your hearts and just like let the work happen. I know in our household here, there's some things going on where there's division and difficulty, and every group, this happens in like every single group. And you just have to know that we can't, all blame doesn't go on one person. God uses us in each other's lives to just sand out the rough places. Okay. Sorry. I'm like, tripping over my words here, but we call them sandpaper people. God's going to use each other in your lives to change you. That's what he does. And the work is hard. It can be difficult. But if everybody is just looking at themselves, then it does become good and it does become pleasant. Now, Philippians chapter 2, we got to go here because in what's sad is when there's division among marriages. This is actually what I give people. This is what Adam and I, we've done marriage counseling a few different times. We're about to do one again soon. And we don't go to, yes, you just sit tight, stay right there. We don't go to, is it Ephesians 5 or whatever? We've found that those beautiful verses on marriage, when it shows what the husband's supposed to do and what the woman's supposed to do, it almost just blows up what their spouse is not doing. And those can be really hard. But Philippians 2 is my most favorite verses for marriage and just residential discipleship and just family. So if you could read 1-4, that would be great.
Is there any encouragement from belonging to Christ, any comfort from his love, any fellowship together in the Spirit? Are your hearts tender and compassionate? Then make me truly happy by agreeing wholeheartedly with each other, loving one another, and working together with one mind and purpose. Don't be selfish. Don't try to impress others. Be humble, thinking of others as better than yourselves. Don't look out only for your interests, but take an interest in others too.
Thank you so much. You can hear the heart, and this was Christ's heart as well. When he pulls his guys aside, he's just like, listen, you guys, you've seen things done this way, but it's not going to be this way among you. It's not going to be so. And here, Paul, he's like, if there's any consolation, any comfort, okay, if there's any comfort of love, if any fellowship of the Spirit, fulfill my joy. The one thing that makes him happy, the one thing that makes me the happiest, I don't care about straight A's, like at all. Like I don't care if my kids, I really don't even care about school. They just need to learn how to read their Bibles and do math. But we have to send them, right? So anyways, but the point is that what is important to me is the scriptures, the Lord, and it makes me so happy when I see my kids playing together. It makes me so happy. I just love it when there's unity in my house and when there's sharing and when there's thoughtfulness. And it's like the most beautiful thing to a parent. And it's the same thing. It's hard. It hurts our hearts when we see division in ministry. And um, and here's Paul. He's like, listen, this fulfill my joy, be like-minded, have the same love, be of one accord, one mind, like get on the same page, get on board. And then he tells us how. There's some how-tos. Let nothing be done through selfish ambition or conceit, but in lowliness of mind. And I'll tell you what cures division. Humility. Humility is a cure-all for division because, like I told you, there's a lot of self involved in division, and humility is the opposite of that. It's esteeming others. It's having a low esteem of yourself. So in verse 3, this is somehow to, the disciples, the reason why a divisive issue arose is because they all wanted for themselves something greater than what they thought they were getting. And so verse 3 says, let nothing be done through selfish ambition, but in lowliness of mind. Have a low mind of yourself. It's just not all about you. It's not all about you. It's about somebody else. And if everybody's thinking that way, like it's amazing, And so in marriage, in relationships, in residential discipleship, don't just look out for your own interest. If you're somebody who's just going to be all about what you need, this is what I need, this is what I need, that's going to be difficult. You're going to rub people the wrong way, and people aren't going to respond well to that, and they shouldn't. And, and you're going to have division in your life. But then we won't read this. We'll just sort of begin to end here. But 5 through 11 takes you right to Jesus of Philippians 2. He says, let this mind be in you, which was also in Christ. And then he defines how Christ lived. He defines that Christ took on no reputation. He actually left his reputation behind and came down here and was unknown. Jesus was unknown until his baptism. For like 30 years, he just lived as a person and he worked and he was unknown. And then it says that he came in the likeness of man, he humbled himself, and he became obedient all the way to death. Like this is the example that Paul points the Philippian church to, is be obedient. Like nobody's actually calling you to physically die. He's calling you to be alive, to be a living sacrifice. But this is like the obedience all the way, even to death. If everybody can start doing this, and I know we're new at it, so we're learning and, going through some bumps along the way. But if, the disciples did it, they struggled, but you know what? It was so cool. I just imagine these men after the resurrection of Jesus and serving together. And I know that as they grew and as they matured, there was a lot less fighting, and they could probably look back on these moments and just chuckle, but it should be different among us. Okay. But I will close with this one thought that Jesus said, that the way people will know we are Christians is by our love for one another. And that's one of the things that gets attacked the most is the relationships with one another. So just be on guard of that. But that's the scripture verses for today.
I hate that you're sick.
Yeah. Thank you.
I know. This morning when I was reading, I was thinking about the parable that he was telling them, the story, because he's always trying to do what when he's sharing a parable? What's he trying to do? Huh? Teach them, help them understand something clearly, right? And Emily did such a great job of pulling in what just happened, right? Where they were like, the rich young ruler didn't leave his stuff, but we've left our stuff and we're serving and working. And he's trying to teach his men something. But I really sat there today. So who do you think the king represents? Who's the king in the story? Or the landowner, sorry. The Lord, yeah. And so, and the person standing around, right, is someone who's given their heart to Jesus or is saved, right? And so this morning, I just had this picture of standing there and having the Lord come up to me and say, there's kingdom work. I got work in my vineyard. There's people in this world that need to know me. Do you want to come serve? Right? And so we know from God's word that he created us to serve, right? He created us with that in us. And then you know from just life, like the reality is when you feel like you have a purpose, right? There's more of a fulfillment. And God is saying to each of you, like in Luke, I've saved you to serve me in holiness and righteousness. And Ephesians 2:10 says that I have a purpose for each of your lives. Before you even were born, Jeremiah says, I had a plan for your life. And there are good works that I want you to do. And then I just watched him walk up to this man and say, do you want to work in my vineyard? And as a hope to die drug addict that was a train wreck with a criminal record and destroyed lives and families, to hear Jesus say, do you want a purpose? Do you want to serve me? Do you want to do something that would help others? I just was really thinking about that. So they said yes. And then when he comes back later, he sees more people standing around, like Emily said. They weren't there early, but they came later, or we don't know. But one of the questions he asked them are, why aren't you working? And their response was, well, nobody's hired us. But I was thinking about us, like, why do we sometimes not feel like we could go into the field and serve in God's kingdom? Why might you not feel like you could do that? You don't feel good enough? Uh-huh. What else?
Don't feel you have anything to offer.
You don't feel like you have anything to offer? Huh?
Not deserving.
Not deserving. Yeah. And that's what, and then sometimes we don't know what to do, like what do we do? Right. And so I was just thinking about all of those things, but he keeps going and inviting and going and inviting and going and inviting. Cause I just really felt like this morning as I stood there, like, he's challenging some hearts on this call in this room because he's trying to say to you, are you willing to just really lay down your life and serve me? Like, I know you don't think you can do anything. I know that you don't feel equipped. We've been reading Moses kind of at the same time. But there's work to do in my kingdom. Now, it doesn't mean all of you are going to run a women's discipleship ministry. Doesn't mean you're all going to have to move to Africa and share the gospel with pygmies. But, maybe it's just like, Lord, am I really willing to just say, here I am, Lord. What do you want to do with my life? And you can tell him because he already knows. I don't really feel equipped and I don't know what I could do in your kingdom. But the minute you say, yes, here I am, I want to serve you, it's so Karate Kid. It's like, okay, let's put some wax on. Like, let's start to do some things, even here, that are going to train you. I can look back with 2020, I can look back and go, things that blew my mind, like, why did you ask me to do that, Lord? It's some random stuff. Like, how did I end up teaching the Bible in the jail when I was less than a year old and I didn't know how to teach, right? How did you do that? I wasn't even allowed in the jail, but somehow he made a way, right? And I'm teaching the Bible and I'm teaching crazy stuff because I'm brand new, but I'm trying, and but I didn't know that I was going to spend the rest of my life teaching his word, but he did, and he gave me a captive audience that couldn't leave, right? And then, so I just want to encourage you, like, I really felt like he was trying to say, I'm really trying to walk by some of you and say, hey, I know you're saved now, right? And like Emily said, they were like, we've all left things, everybody does. But, I was thinking about this too. He said, whether you're saved early in life and you get to serve him your whole life, right? Or you're saved like the thief on the cross, where you like just said today you're going to be with me in paradise, And so sometimes, your brain goes, well, why not just wait till the end and then get saved, right? What's the problem with that?
Never know.
You never know when you're going to go. What else? The thief on the cross was there because that was a consequence of his life. Like, you live out consequences of sin, right? And you get pretty much a painful, miserable life, or you get to surrender your life where you're at and say, I'll serve you. And then any pain that you walk through has some purpose, right? So I wouldn't suggest waiting until the cross, But I also thought it was really interesting because the Lord, and Emily did such a great job, but our eyes on each other, they would have been perfectly fine with their salary if they didn't know what everyone else had gotten, right? And we don't want what we deserve, and they got what was fair. And it's just hard because it's like, well, how come she? We do that a lot. And God was also trying to teach Peter and some of those people, it's not even on your work, on how good you serve me. It's really just on looking at me. And I was thinking about so many that Judas learned about Jesus and started walking with him first, but he didn't end up in the kingdom. Paul was way later, but he ended up doing mighty things. So it's just about a heart before God. So I just really, today, I spent so much time just kind of thinking about this and just praying, because I know he's trying to knock on your hearts, some of you, and we should all say, Lord, I want to be your follower. But there's just this place like, okay, I don't know what you can do with my life, but here it is, I just remember Emily, when God started knocking on her heart, she was pretty like resolved, like, I'm going to do this. When God started talking to Becca, some of you don't know her, but about serving, she was just freaked out sitting in a chair, and God was calling her to the school of ministry. And she was like all weird. And I'm like, what's wrong? She's like, God showed me something today. I'm like, what did he show you? She's like, I'm not saying it out loud because then it's true. And she spent the next week in torment because she knew what he wanted her to do, but she was afraid of it. And so sometimes it's just God's kind of talking to you. So I want to encourage you. I also thought this, and I'll just end with this, was, sometimes we don't always make the connection. Jesus was teaching those men right there before the thing with James and John happened, before they got mad that they asked first. He was teaching them about keeping their eyes on other people. And then a few days later, or however long later, they had time to put it into practice, because that's the very thing they did. They're like, why didn't we think of that? Why do you get to sit at the right hand? And they're looking at their position in their place after he just taught a message about that. And we sit in these living rooms all the time and we hear things. And sometimes it's for today, but sometimes he's teaching you for something you're going to walk through shortly thereafter. And so just grab a hold of these truths and go, okay, Lord, I don't know how that applies to me, but I want to learn things, because a lot of these things you take in and you hold on to, but they're not just good ideas. They're things he wants you to put into practice in your life. Does that make sense? Okay. So, will you pray for us?